evening and welcome to the dark side. Today, Lord Sith has joined me on the other side, I think. This should be fun. Darth Maul, Lord Sith. Don't know which one you're going for. Which one are you going for, hon?
Emperor Palpatine.
Emperor Palpatine. There we go. Okay. So enjoy all the Star Wars references that we can get into in one night. We are here on the dark side, bringing you live discussion, news, views, education, and more. Today's topic is the police, it feels like. But before we get into today's topic, we are going to look at some news stories that are hitting us currently. So, have some news stories for you today. The Guardian is reporting that the UK sports governing bodies fail to make the grade in landmark race report. Now, none of us are surprised by this who live, breathe, worked in or around sport in the UK, but it's an interesting report. It's probably worth doing a whole entire show on it, but I think it's worth bringing up that there is this report is out. So for the last year or two, we've had the footballers taking the knee before every game, the level of abuse that has been hurled at them, and people are losing their patience with them. What's really interesting is that you're losing your patience with people taking a knee, which is really not affecting you in any way, shape, or form, proving the point that the reason that they're taking the knee is the fact that you refuse to engage in the subject. Anyway, it says that the first index to track race representation across the UK sports has led to 43% of national governing bodies being handed the lowest three available grades. A trio of England's biggest sports administrators, the Football Association, the England and Wales Cricket Board, and the Rugby Union, failed to even take part. Lovely. The inaugural race representation index, commissioned by Sport Monitoring Advisory Panel via charity Sporting Equals, was motivated by the Black Lives Matter movement. I can't help but think it was motivated by all of the actions that our sports people have taken. Plus, there's been the cricket incident where that makes it sound like it was a singular. The cricket report and police. Oh, you know what, sport in the UK is a bit of a mess at the minute. Anyway, so on and on the report goes. It's really interesting. If you've got time to read it, there's at least a write-up of it in The Guardian with a link to the whole report that you can go and have a look. I really do advise having a look at it because I think it gives a sense of the fact that a lot of people outside of Britain often have this idea that British people are really proper and very polite, and it's a really lovely place to live, and it's all of those things, as well as racist. Yeah. Okay. Any thoughts on the sports governing body?
Well, it's not really surprising that the FA didn't take part. I mean, who's the president of the FA?
I don't remember. It's been a while.
Okay, I'll put it to you in this way. The president of the FA is Meghan Markle's brother-in-law.
Anyways, okay, so moving on to our next story. The Peace Corps in the USA, the Peace Corps in the USA have updated their information for volunteers going to Ukraine, and I think that many other volunteer organizations have followed suit, but this is just one, and a friend had this posted to her page, and I thought, let me go have a look. So on their Peace Corps volunteer page for Ukraine, there is a section called Diversity and Inclusion, and it talks about the diversity and how rich it can be in the US, but how you go to certain other countries and it could be very monocultural, Ukraine being one of those things. And it goes through to talk about the considerations that one might have if one decides to go and volunteer for the Peace Corps in Ukraine. It goes on about gender roles. It goes on about possible considerations for volunteers of color. And then it singles out a particular group of members of color, possible considerations for African American or Black volunteers. And it looks like, I'll just read it. It's not uncommon for Ukrainians to refer to African Americans as the N-word. Volunteers of color may be called a monkey or may see children's games with blackface. Being aware of the history of dehumanization for people of African descent may help inform where this comes from. It does not justify it. It will be at your discretion to determine the intent. No matter the intent, staff recognize the impact that hearing the word may evoke hurt and anger. If you view it as unlearned, something the person has been exposed to, it may be an opportunity for you to educate the person. We are here to support your successful service, and these comments and images can be a huge distraction and obstacle to you. It also goes on to list possible consideration for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, asexuals, and so on and so forth, and has similar ideas. It's quite interesting that they then list a number of real life people who are on the ground, and what the people say is that it's a 50-50 experience. You will find that there are some people who do this, and then there's the other Ukrainians who feel deeply ashamed that this is happening in their country on their watch, and this is how people are behaving. And so I think it's only fair to say that it is as with all things, it's not everyone, but it does. In the middle of a war, in the middle of your crisis, it's quite interesting that people still have the time for racism. So the Peace Corps are highlighting to volunteers of color that this may not be the country you want to go volunteer in. Maybe you'd be safer somewhere else. Any thoughts on volunteering to help people in dire need?
Yeah, I mean, if you like Russian roulette, no pun intended in this, then go for it. You know, if you feel like saying, hey, is this person going to be racist to me today? Then go for it. Of course, you know, people just need to accept the consequences of their actions. And by that, I mean, you might not die by a Russian bullet. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I think it's fair to say, if I'm providing a service and you start railing off every racial slur you may not be the recipient of that service. I just think that's fair. And
well, you're going to be a recipient of a service.
Well, we're not advocating for violence, but what we are saying is that, you know, I think one of the good things about this, and I think maybe this should be, the Peace Corps are proactively approaching this. They know that oftentimes world majority communities are quick to volunteer to help their neighbor. It is part of their identity. It's part of their culture. It's a norm that they're used to. And so when they hear something like this, they're very quick to do that. And so the Peace Corps and other organizations have been very quick to say, this might not be the place for you. And I think that there are plenty of other places where, you know, keep the people safe at the end of the day. What else, you know, or not even say this might not be the place for you, but bear in mind, if you go there, you may find the ignorance that you get here there.
I'm going to speak on experience in this, because I actually do have experience of these matters and volunteering around the world. I have been to some of the Eastern European countries in a volunteer capacity in different projects and things like that. And I can definitely say that there is a certain amount of ignorance that goes along with it, and an innocent ignorance.
Yes.
You know, just from the fact that the time that I was there, some people had never seen a black person with their own eyes before. The only experience of black people was the NBA. And being the size that I am, everyone asked if I was in the NBA. You know, I had children ask me if I was the color I was because I drank too much chocolate milk. You know, it's that sort of ignorance, but a level of innocence that goes along with it. Conversely, I have been to some of these countries where people did intentionally use the N-word as an insult. And they were trying to be offensive. And I think it's right to highlight that there are certain
real differences.
there are differences between the communities, but even within the countries, there's a lot of people that are offended at what's going on.
Yeah.
And just being the nature of who I am, I was having some issues in one of these countries that I was in. And being the nature of who I am, I speak to everyone, I talk to people. I I didn't know it at the time, but actually I made friends with like the leader of the biggest gang in the city.
Why does that not surprise me somehow?
No,
I'm sure our viewers aren't surprised
but I
somehow.
was never called the N word again for my entire stay there,
Well, I can imagine you weren't.
right?
Yes.
Um, so there are people out there that are genuinely offended. Look,
Yeah.
this
No,
isn't
I
right, and I think we need to be
mindful.
open and fair in this, and
Yeah.
say, look, you are going to have to deal with this, but the reality is you're probably dealing with it in your own country if you're from a country that isn't world majority people.
So there you go. So I thought it was I thought there was a point to be had in the news story that actually there is a way to approach these things, to be mindful of the fact of who volunteers, who goes and does these things, and to prepare people appropriately for what they might face, because you know you're all gung-ho to get into a situation and then you're faced with that. It could be quite the shock to your system. So having a really well thought out piece I thought was really good, and also highlighting the difference between the fact that some people are, these of course are not colonial nations. They don't have the history and the baggage. They aren't seeing a lot of people. It also goes on to highlight that the majority of African or Asian people in the country are actually students. So the Peace Corps volunteers are more likely to be stopped because they're checking if they need to be evacuated as part of the student population, not that they're there to help. And so they will be more frequently and routinely stopped because it's unusual for them to have African and Asian people within the country. It's just they're Ukraine. That's a monocultural society, and so they're used to, some places are used to the students, and of course the awareness has been raised that the students were not being treated fairly and needed to be evacuated as well from those places. So I thought it was a good write-up. I also thought it's sad that we need to have that write-up, right? It's both, it can be both. It can be both things. All right, so my final news story for day, I say final to intro the main story. I have like 5 news stories, but I'm just going to set you up with a series of news stories and then you go. That's basically what I'm going to do. So the last story I wanted to talk about today is some reporting out of the BBC actually on Ethiopia's Tigray War. I hope I've said that correctly. Basically, Mekelle is a part of the country that has been cut off, and there is about to be, they hope, a what's the word I'm looking for? Ceasefire. To allow the people to get necessary supplies, basically. So the part of that, the part of the Ethiopian region that's been cut off, that hasn't had access because of the fighting, they want to have a ceasefire in order that the people can actually get something. This has been going on for 17 months, civil war. I, in my ignorance, really thought that it was over, because I do remember reporting on the end of the dispute between Ethiopia and its neighboring country, and for some reason for me that then meant, I don't know, I made the wrong association. But that's to show you that we're not getting all of the information around the world, and you have to really go dig it and search for it yourself. And knowing that we have Ethiopian friends and so on and so forth, you have to really dig up what's happening. So I can't give you the full report on all of the things that are happening over there in Ethiopia. I can say this, that things that people are actually suffering with there is like the cost of grain. We can empathize with the cost of grain has skyrocketed. It's, you know, a year ago they were able to actually afford it. Now people can't even afford it. The prices have not only doubled, but you're talking about, like they was talking about 100 kilos of something, of teff, which is one of their main grains, which of course the poorer people use, has gone from $80 to $146 within a year. But it's also interesting that things that were valuable are now devaluing. So of course selling your rings to kind of make some money to buy the thing, they're now saying you can sell a 21 carat ring for like $64 when it was you know, a lot more than that. So on and so forth. Cars have devalued by half. you can't even sell the things that you own to raise the money to feed your family. And these are the things that are having devastating effects on the local community. There are things like water and power outages, where the people don't have consistent water and power, so it's intermittent, and then there can be times when they go for days without it. I mean, this is a really, really devastating war, and they're talking about how it's affecting that northern region out in Ethiopia. For those of our Ethiopian viewers, I'm sorry I can't give your country the proper the development that I would like to of the war, but I do want to highlight to our viewers that there are wars going on across the world, and places where we could be interested and helping and doing something to help the people in those areas. But in this one, a truce has been declared, and that northern region may get a ceasefire, which we hope will lead to a peace talks, which will end the war completely. That is the hope. That is what's being reported. We can only wait and see and follow with interested eyes as to what's happening over in Ethiopia. Any thoughts?
I think the real question is, about the end of the war. It's whether Western nations will stop meddling in these countries' affairs long enough for them to sort things out.
Yeah, I think it's really, it's troubling how many fingers. So I wanted to bring a news story today, which I didn't, but I'm just going to mention it quickly because I think it bears mentioning. So this week, watching the news, as I do with the children, and the Falklands War was mentioned. It was the 40-year anniversary of the invasion of the Falkland Islands. And I sat there and I thought, oh, I've got to take a deep breath on this one. It was really difficult because you're listening to these people and then you're like, the British territory of the Falklands, blah, 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 blah. You mean the one that's in Argentina? You mean that one? And it was, these young people had been sent to go and rid the island of the Argentinians. But they had to travel for how long to get there? Because it's not in Britain. And it just beggars belief that it's so normalized that Britain has stuck flags in places, called it their own, and Argentina's still saying the UN have not done enough to enforce international law in the Falklands. They have not resolved the issue. According to the British, it's all resolved. According to Argentina, it's a totally different story. Who are the islands next to? They're not off the coast of Britain. They're off the coast of Argentina. And I think when you say to people, if the West would stop meddling, it's all of this. It's I've stuck my flag in it. It's mine. It's my British territory. What? And just the sheer arrogance of it is just amazing, that even today you can still have that position despite the Argentinian governments, the UN, and everyone actually trying to get involved and resolve these issues. You still have that. And so when you highlight, if they could stop putting their fingers in the pies, I guess that's what we're talking about. Oh no, it's terrible. Right. Today's topic. The Metropolitan Police have had another report done. So today we're going to bring you some of that report. To intro it though, I want to give you some news stories. So Kevin Phillips was a Metropolitan Police officer, and he was filmed committing a sex act on himself while in a London park in public wearing his full uniform. There is an entire video of this man sexually pleasuring himself on a park bench while watching a video in full uniform. He's been obviously arrested, and there are charges being pending for him. But as I went looking for that story to bring you to intro our story today, I then found a story of a student officer. Let me see if I can get this details up. So there was a student officer who would have faced would have faced a sacking over indecent images of children, but instead he was allowed to resign. And the misconduct hearing has not concluded yet, but Keel Walker, 21, is now within he's been placed on the sex offenders register list, so should not be able to work for the police force again. But as we've seen, they don't expect that will come out in the next report. The next story, you're going to enjoy this one, because I was looking for one story. So I just thought, just looking for one story. But in this 1 week, we've had Met Police officer admits to Primark upskirting and owning 1,000 indecent images of children. This man was sitting in the Primark changing rooms, and if you don't know what upskirting is, it's recording up girls' skirts. This is apparently now a thing. It is very disturbing, and the Met Police officer, of course, will be sentenced in Kingston Crown Court. So that's yet to happen. But these stories are hitting just this week alone. I still have another story. There's more. Cleveland police officer. He is now suspended because he's accused of having a relationship with a junior colleague and sharing crass photos, and he's facing misconduct. And so he has been abusing his position and is now being sacked. So that's one for Cleveland, just in case you thought it was just the Met Police. The Essex Police Force, just this week, allegations have come out again. There are 2 police officers, separate incidents, who are being sacked or suspended, I should say. Suspended. They're not sacked. They're currently suspended. There are 2 of them in separate incidents. One is that they involved an inappropriate relationship with a junior colleague. And in completely separate matters, there was one regarding what was it now? The police force referred a senior officer over an allegation of sexual assault. So you have one who is abusing their power and entering in relationships with young colleagues and then abusing that relationship. And then you have one that just outright assaulted somebody that they work with. It's a colleague. They just decided that she was fair game, assaulted her, and now they're both suspended. And there's an IOPC, investigation. And I found all of those because I just wanted to mention today on the intro to the Met Police report on, let me get the title right, forgive me. Metropolitan Police's approach to corruption is not fit for purpose. There is a 150-something page document that you can read that will tell you that it's not fit for purpose. And so today we are going to touch on that. But the reason it's not fit for purpose, of course, is that, in just a week, I found a cursory search. 7 suspended officers, 7, due to a flurry of sexual misconduct. Just a flurry.
Yeah. Look, for anyone interested, you don't actually have to read the full 150 pages. The first 50 pages should give you pretty much everything that you need to know. The latter parts of the report go into the processes, investigatory methods, etc., etc., etc. But the real meat of it you can get from the first 50-ish pages. And I say this having read it.
62.
Yeah. So I did most of the legwork for it. So I can tell you, you really don't need to read all 150.
We appreciate your legwork. We do.
So, yes, this was the investigation by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services into the Met Police's counter-corruption
arrangement
as it relates to Daniel Morgan's independent panel. Now, to show my age, I actually remember Daniel Morgan murder.
You're the same age, and I don't remember, so I don't know. You just have a good memory, huh?
Yeah. Well, listen, I remember it because I kept thinking to myself, because of the age I was at, I'm not going to give away my age, but the age I was at, I was young enough to say, where'd someone get an axe to chop someone in the head?
Yeah.
Right.
I kind of vaguely remember that detail. I don't remember the whole story, I will say.
Right. And I remember when questions about corruption and corruption getting in the way of the investigations came about, and police were questioned about this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I do remember this when it occurred. So I'm not quite sure where to begin. Perhaps the best place to start might actually be like the opening sentence of the report. So in the forward of it,
would you like me to read the opening sentence?
You can.
In 1987, this one?
Yep.
In 1987, Daniel Morgan, a 37-year-old private investigator, was brutally murdered in London. The Metropolitan Police Service's investigation was hampered by police corruption.
Okay. So, fast forward, 1987, Stephen Lawrence was murdered. 1992. Yeah. No, that was when the first report came out.
Hold on, I will tell you the exact date.
Well, look, the reality is, however many years later, we are still dealing with allegations of corruption within the Met Police. Okay. Fast forward again.
93.
Okay. 93, he was murdered then.
22nd
So
of April.
1993, Stephen Lawrence is murdered, right? So we're talking about 6 years later. We're still dealing with corruption or allegations of corruption within the Metropolitan Police. And I know recently, just a few years ago, I believe some of the investigating officers, the higher ups, were actually questioned under caution not too long ago in relation to this. I'm not sure if any charges came out of it. I doubt it, because if you read the report, you'll understand it's just corruption upon corruption.
For those of you that don't know, Stephen Lawrence is a young Black teenager who was stabbed to death in southeast London by a gang of white young people. It was an unprovoked attack, of course. It rocked London to its core. More so, not only because of the brutality, the racism, and the horror of the murder, but also because it just went uninvestigated to a large degree. The investigation was whitewashed, it was ignored, and his parents had to campaign tirelessly to push for a proper investigation. And when the charges were finally brought forward, it crumbled under the weight of the police incompetency. And so even to this day, I think there hasn't really been a satisfactory result for the Lawrence family. And
no, some of them did go to jail.
Some of them did go to jail, but it's still...
but that, I believe, was due to a private prosecution, or was it the private prosecution that fell apart? Anyway.
So yeah, just in case for those of you that are thinking, Stephen Lawrence, what are they saying? If you're from another country, this, for everyone who's in the UK, that's shorthand for you, but for those outside of the UK, that might not be.
Right. So we now fast forward on, and we're still finding evidence of corruption in the police, to the point where we have this report that was just released saying, hey, listen, they're still corrupt. So you're talking about 80, what do we say?
So some 35 years later, they're saying that despite all of the investigations and reviews, the Mr. Morgan's murder still remains unsolved. And then this has prompted this new investigation, not only as to why that one never worked, but into then wider allegations of corruption within the Met Police.
Right. So there are a few key points that I want to bring out of the report, right? And the first point is that systems do exist within the Met Police to monitor corruption.
Yep.
But they are either inadequate or ignored. Right. You have the report.
I have the report up on my screen. Yep, I do.
Okay. So if you go to page 14 of the report.
Yes.
Right. I just want to read a quote from it.
Yep. You want me to read a quote? Which paragraph?
You can read the first paragraph.
Okay. We established that since 2018, there has been an increase in the number of people recruited with prior recordable offences. This coincided with the implementation of the Vetting APP and increases in recruitment under the Uplift program. The combination of recruits with recordable offences, those with declarable associations, and the Directorate of Professional Standards, DPS, not being aware of all of these paints a worrying picture.
Right. Now, the third paragraph.
MPS personnel are required to report any change in their circumstances to the FVU, despite attempts to make personnel aware of their obligations between January 2021 and September 21. The FVU had only received 48 changes of circumstance forms in a workforce of 44,000. It is extremely unlikely that this is a true reflection of changes during that period.
Okay. Page 15, first paragraph.
In the places we visited, we found that responsibility for maintaining the records varied and the registers were often underused. However, record keeping within specialist departments was significantly better than in basic command units or BCUs.
Right. So before I go on this particular paragraph, I'm just going to stop here quickly because I think this is important to highlight. What it's saying is, this paragraph here, is that in specialist units, record keeping is better. Right. But on your rank and file who are out on the streets, you don't have records on.
You don't have accurate records of these people.
Right?
Yeah. You don't update their information. They don't change their information. You don't know who these people are.
Yes. So which is more worrying?
Rank and file. I mean, no, all of it's worrying. I'm glad at least someone is keeping a record. It is deeply disturbing that people who are in charge of stop and search, who are in charge of on the beats, walking the streets, going around, building community relations and doing those things can't be trusted to keep their own information up to date.
It's not just a matter of keeping your information up to date. I think what the report highlights actually is that there's a mixed proportion who actually don't even know the system exists. And so it's hard to keep them responsible for something that they don't exist, and that perhaps it highlights a flaw within the
highlights a flaw. Maybe I phrased it incorrectly. Shall I say, you as the employing body do not have accurate information for those who are walking out onto your streets. And so therefore, if they are cautioned in another part of the country, you won't have that on your system. If they move house, you won't have that. If they separate. And I mean, to think of it the other way, let's look at it from a police safety aspect, right? So your rank and file are going out on the streets. Now, what happens if one of them gets into trouble? Something bad happens to them, because we're always told that police are in danger, right? So they get attacked and end up in hospital. Your files are out of date. You can't contact the next of kin. You don't know where these people live, what their telephone numbers are. You don't have details for these people. How you can contact somebody?
I don't think it's necessarily talking about those details. What it speaks of, or what I believe it's speaking to, is that when you become a police officer, you have to declare certain things, like if you are associated with criminals.
Yes.
Right. So, say your cousin is a drug dealer, you need to declare that. If you have debt that's unmanageable,
Yeah.
You have to declare that, because it leaves you open to bribery.
Yes.
And so they need to monitor these things. So what's happening is that people are getting into debt, or they're making associations or relationships. So if you have a close relationship with a journalist, you're meant to declare things like this.
Yeah.
People are not declaring these things.
Well, it seems, and also just maintaining their records, full stop. I mean, it's not just these things. It's just like a huge flaw in their maintenance system.
Listen, I'm going to be honest. Something happens to a police officer out on the beat, and you can't tell the next of kin because they didn't update their records. I don't really care about. That's their choice.
No, but I think it shows the level of disregard. My point is, it shows the level of disregard that you have, because it goes to the institutional nature, right? I only care about my police force in as much as you're doing what I want you to do. I don't really have a duty of care, not to the general public and not to even the employees. There's a lack of care, full stop. It's an institution which demonstrates itself to be, institutionally corrupt. Anyway, go on with I don't want to get too sidetracked with this point. There's a lot to dig into. Let's go on.
Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight, look, this is the information that they're missing out on. Any of that stuff, right? Right. So, just going to read some more of the report. We found the MPS has a detailed business interest policy, which includes annual review, risk management, and an appeals process. However, having a clear policy is one thing, robustly implementing it is another. Right? So this goes back to the point that I'm making. You have the policies there.
They just don't
don't implement it.
Yeah.
Right? And I think we see this time and time again when we do cases and we're talking about the Metropolitan Police, like, hold up, wait there. How are you still a police officer? How are you getting away with it? Because they don't implement the policies that actually exist.
Yeah.
They talk about the failings of the system. So within the IT system, you would have to open up a number of separate individual folders to get access to all the information on a particular person. It's not like it's all collated in one place.
Right.
So it then creates obstacles towards effectively tracking people and maintaining records. And on top of this, the DPS, Department for Professional Standards, confesses to the people writing this report that they just don't have the resources to monitor compliance with these things.
Well, they talk about, is it 3 deficiencies that in the risk assessment process? Those making the risk assessment don't have access to all of the corruption related intelligence, so they don't even have the access. The second thing is they've not been trained to even work to use the system. And finally, the assessment is wholly subjective and is open to individual interpretation. So even if we got through the first 2 things, it's left to the individual to work out whether they think it is or isn't something that needs to be gone through the actual full process or not. It beggars belief that you have, such a subjective system without panels, without any oversight or anybody else from an outside governing body actually checking this stuff. Anyway.
Right. So, look, this is, the point they're making. The systems do exist. They're just not implemented. And I think we need to acknowledge that, okay, some of it is done due to a lack of resources. So, let's just be real. The Tory government has taken away from police funding.
Yep.
But the police are an inefficiently run service anyway. Right? the fact that community policing no longer exists. You're shipping people from different communities into communities in which they don't live, increases costs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an efficient service.
Yeah.
Right. You could make those savings there, but the reality is that police funding has been cut by the Tories over the years. And they just, in some instances, don't have enough people to do it. Right. Right. So declarable associations. Right. So this is where you associate, as I said, if your family member is a known criminal, you have to declare these things.
Business, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Blah,
Now, this will make you laugh. The current MPS, Metropolitan Police Service, declarable associations policy contains a surprising omission and is out of date. It refers to the National Policing Improvement Agency, an organization that hasn't existed since 2013.
Oh dear Lord, it's not going to make me laugh. It's just going to make me sad. All right then. Moving on to.
I have to laugh at this. I'm like, wait there, you're coming to tell me about the law and you don't even know about your own policies. Yep. Okay. It also does not include requirements for personnel to disclose any relationships with journalists and any relationships with extremist groups. Right?
Yeah.
In common with the response in respect of business interests, a local professional standards unit said that providing details of who had a declarable association, what the risk levels were, and what conditions have been set would require them to manually open and read documents in multiple electronic folders. They also told us they had no time to monitor their low and medium risk declarable associations.
Do you know, I think that just leaves, it leaves the, so this is where I think that education is important, because I think sometimes people will be listening to this and they'll think to themselves, what do I care? How is this affecting me? But this is how it affects you. If your police officer is not declaring all of their associations, through whichever means they're getting their associations, and one of those associations turns, bribes, puts pressure on, in a situation where the police officer is responsible for such sensitive work and behavior, to me this is really problematic. We already have institutionally racist, we already have institutionally misogynistic, but then to add to this corruptible element, which goes kind of even beyond that, which means that someone could bribe a police officer quite easily because their superiors have no idea what's going on in the lives of the officers, have no idea about the relationships these people have. It does affect the everyday person. It does have an impact that these things are not being followed through, and they don't have the resources to really invest in ensuring that their police force is safe, it is healthy, it's not corruptible. One corrupt officer, but we opened with 7 stories in 1 week of sexual misconduct. I mean, 7.
Listen, sexual misconduct in the police. Okay, I'm just going to take a little detour here. Sexual misconduct in the police, and I don't mean just necessarily the Met Police, I mean the police within the UK, go hand in hand. There's no escaping them. No. Right? We've spoken about Koshka Duff a few times. We spoke about Child Q last week, the week before. 2 weeks ago, we spoke about Child Q. In February of this year, you had Yvonne Farrell. She was a Rastafarian, and she was arrested and stripped naked and left in a police cell for 3 hours. Right? When she made a complaint, and this happened not under the Met Police, this was the Hertfordshire Police. When she made a complaint, the professional standards, right, cleared the police of any wrongdoing.
Shocking. Oh, so surprised.
Right? And it was only when the lawyers get involved and we have to start talking money now that they admit that something went wrong. And I think what we need to acknowledge here is that we talk about the picture of misogyny within policing. What we have to understand here is that they're using this as a form of punishment against women. Right? So Koshka Duff, she's giving out information telling young black children of their rights when they're stopped and searched. The police confront her. She refuses to acquiesce. She's stripped naked. Yvonne Farrell refused to provide her name. And you need to remember, unless you're being charged or you have committed a crime, and I think even when you have done, it's not an offense not to provide your name in the UK. Right? So if a police officer stops you, you don't have to give them your name. You don't have to identify yourself. Right? Because she wouldn't identify herself, that is why she ended up in the cell.
There is your punishment. And we are going to...
And the argument that they used was, because we didn't know who we're dealing with, we had to make sure that she was safe and didn't try to harm herself. Well, what's that got to do with leaving her naked?
What my clothes got to do with this story? Please.
Right? Take away her shoelaces and her belt and done. You don't need to strip her naked.
That's what I do with men all the time. They manage to just take away belts and shoelaces. This is not the most difficult. It's not rocket science.
You have to understand that
it's a punishment for women.
As a form of punishment.
It is
right? So anyway, that's a detour. I wasn't going to go into, but we ended up there. Right.
Well, are we going to talk about the digital device management? Are we going to touch on that in the report?
I know it's in there. What I want to get to before that, because I'm mindful of the time, is that recommendations have been made to solve these issues. And these recommendations have been coming in for years, for decades, right? I want to read some excerpts from page 16 and 17.
Yep. I'm there already. 16 is...
Hold up, wait, there is it 16 and 17?
No, I don't think it's 16. Maybe it's 17.
No, 16 and 17, it does touch on your digital issues, actually.
It touches on the digital issues, but not on the issue that you want to raise about the general...
Well, it does, because the point is that within the report, they're identifying in 2017 and 2019, recommendations were made.
Okay.
About securing and buttressing.
All right. So in January 2017 and September 2019, we warned the MPS about its lack of IT monitoring. Yet we found it still does not have the capability to proactively monitor its IT systems. The MPS is, by a substantial margin, the largest force in the UK. Yet it is one of only a tiny number that does not have a proactive IT monitoring capability. It is high time that the force took this matter much more seriously. Since 2017, so organizations that work with vulnerable people can be a valuable source of intelligence to help identify officers and staff who abuse their positions for a sexual purpose. Since 2017, we have recommended that the force establish regular links between the counter-corruption units and those agencies and organizations that support vulnerable people. During this inspection, we found, again, no evidence that the MPS was doing this.
Okay, right? So, stick a pin in that. We're going to go to page 19 and 20.
Okay, page 19.
Right. Okay. No, we'll deal with this, and then I'll read what I want to say from page 19 and 20. Right. So what you just read, that part of the report, is highlighting, it's the fact that just in the past few years alone, reports have been released and they've made recommendations. Okay. The recommendations have been ignored or are not being implemented. Now, this is actually quite pertinent, this one, where it speaks of
The IT
making
monitoring
links with vulnerable people,
vulnerable people.
right? Because the reality is a lot of sex workers are vulnerable people. And when you look at what was happening at Charing Cross, right? If some of these measures had been implemented, first of all, the wrongdoing in Charing Cross probably would have been caught earlier, right? People would have been prosecuted earlier, and people would have been protected from abuse.
Ain't that the truth?
Right? So there's the fact that the recommendations are coming in, but you have to remember recommendations were made way before that. We're going back decades.
We've had a number of reports. We've mentioned them here on the show. We've mentioned them here today. There have been reports made over and over again about the institutional challenges, corruption, and so forth that the police are facing. And it really does read from this report as if those reports at the time make a great news headline. There might be a committee that works to write up a good policy, and then the policy gets stuck in a drawer and no one actually does anything with it at all.
So we then go on. Quote, some told us about the potential consequences of reporting wrongdoing. They feared being ostracized by their team or labeled as a troublemaker if they were identified as having made such a report. The leadership of the MPS should be doing more to inculcate a culture in which concerns such as this do not exist. End quote. So if you go and snitch, well, snitches get stitches. Right? But we did a episode a little while back on wrongdoing within police within the UK, in which one police officer sexually assaulted another police officer. The female police officer complained and ends up suspended. Right? She is the one whom her colleagues come for. Right? So there's a lot of issues within that look, there's no accountability, and those that try to hold the police accountable fear recrimination. Right? So this whole argument that people tried to give about, hey, it's just a few bad apples. Clearly, it's not a few bad apples.
No.
I'd say it's a few good apples within a rotten barrel.
Well, I think that might be a more accurate system. There are a few good police officers who are doing their work and are trying their best, but clearly they're swimming against the tide.
Indeed, right. So I want to go to the headline that's or the part of the report that's garnered the most headlines is the institutional corrupt. Now, what you have to understand is the report that found the Met Police to be institutionally corrupt was the Daniel Morgan Independent Panel, and in their report. Now, this is a report into that report, right? And this report by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, I want to highlight because I think this is important.
Okay.
It's important and relevant to what I'm about to read next. That there is context and there is history that is understood in this, and that is this is the same body that cleared police of their actions in regards to the Sarah Everard vigil. Right? So when you saw women being assaulted by police, they cleared the police of any wrongdoing. The women are there protesting the fact that a police officer had raped and murdered a woman. So the police then come in and decide, hey, we're just going to brutalize more women. Right?
Well, it was a vigil. It wasn't even like it was a full-out protest. It was a vigil.
Right. But what then happened is that you had a female protester, one of the most prominent ones, then reporting after that incident that police officers were then contacting her on social media, in essence saying, look, we know who you are, all sorts of stuff, right? But another thing to be pointed out is that this same body, right, that allowed or that said the police had done nothing wrong, was strangely silent on the fact that the police undertook no action to break up this vigil whilst Kate was there. And for those that don't understand what I mean Kate Middleton, the wife of Prince William.
Mm-hmm.
So she attended the vigil, and the police take no action to break up or discharge the vigil, the crowd. But when she leaves, somehow action is undertaken.
Then it's a problem.
Right? Okay. So their report was silent. It somehow ignores this whole fact.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So anyway, this is what this body has to say about the original report. Okay. The panel concluded that the MPS, that is the original Daniel Morgan independent panel, is institutionally corrupt. In essence, the panel defined this type of corruption as one where an organization protects its reputation rather than where any individual benefits from a corrupt act. We concluded that the adverse matters we described in our report bore the hallmarks of limited resources allocated to the maintenance of professional standards, professional incompetence, a lack of understanding of important concepts, poor management, or genuine error, rather than dishonesty, other than in the conduct of some individual officers in the context of specific investigations into Mr. Morgan's murder. Importantly, we found no evidence of any deliberate or coordinated campaign to intentionally frustrate the panel's work. It follows that we would not describe the MPS as institutionally corrupt based upon the evidence we have seen. So once again, let me finish. Let me land here, right? You cleared the police and the Sarah Everard. This is just another whitewash, right? But what undermines what they have just written is what they write next, because this is whoever wrote this is incompetent at best, right? So they immediately go on to say, this should not for a moment be understood to be a finding that there are not serious areas of concern which have been and continue to be present in the MPS. It is essential that the MPS should be more open to criticism and prepared to change when necessary, including by implementing our recommendations. A further failure to do so, without good reason, may well justify the label of institutional corruption in due course. People have been making recommendations for 35 years that have not been implemented. How much more time do you want to give them?
Well, what I found really interesting is the line that you highlighted to me, which is that we found no evidence of deliberate or coordinated efforts. And I was like, but hold on.
I'm going to come back to that one. I'm going to come back to that one.
Okay.
Right? I think it's important to come back to that one. But I'm like, you just declared that if you don't implement these policies, practices, and changes that we are recommending,
then you could be considered maybe to have
institutional
corruption.
Sorry,
which is really weird,
right?
Because you just had a full report of saying they've had this report and they have not implemented the changes. 2019, not implemented changes. 2000 not implemented the changes. So on and so forth. So how many reports do you need before you say hasn't implemented changes? Clearly corruption.
But there were recommendations made back for the Stephen Lawrence McPherson report.
Still haven't been implemented.
Still haven't been implemented. There were recommendations made back at when the original inquiry into Daniel Morgan.
Still haven't been implemented.
Listen, there have been decades of recommendations that the police have not implemented. Decades of recommendations that are meant to help decrease the possibility of corruption and to root out corruption within their midst. And I think what we have to acknowledge here is that there is a real reticence and resistance, and a deliberate one, to implementing methods that will adequately and effectively and efficiently deal with corruption within the Metropolitan Police. And we're speaking specifically of the Metropolitan Police, but I do believe that actually goes wider than the Metropolitan Police.
Well, I think, you know, we have talked often enough about police corruption on here in the varying countries, the UK's different services. I mean, the opening story was about Essex. It was about varying other police. We've mentioned Hertfordshire on here, so varying other police things within the UK. We've talked about police within the USA. It does seem to me that there needs to be kind of a ground zero point where we go, okay, this isn't working. Let's work out what it takes to shut down this and start up something that actually does work. What is it that what do we need to do to put this in place? Because clearly what we have is not working. And there may be good apples that we can save, but we need to do something different than what we've been doing. And I can understand.
Just give them all the P&O treatment.
Well, I can understand from a abolitionist point of view that, of course, this is why abolitionists say what they say. Like, it's what choice do you have when if every single time something happens, you have a report that says this is what you should do better for next time, and then people go, well, I'll just add this to a policy, we'll put it back in the drawer and we'll just move on with our lives and we won't think about it, and then nothing actually concretely changes, that people go, well, I think the only way to deal with policing is to say, let's shut this type of policing down and do something else, because this that we have currently isn't working. So we need to find a way of closing this and opening something else and having some management system that does that process, that works that out, so that we can weed out corruption and we can weed out racism and sexism and pedophilia and misogyny and homophobia and blah, 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 blah. We could actually just take care of all of these things and actually provide the service that people need, which is when a crime is committed, I need you to investigate it. I would even go as far as to say proactively trying to encourage people not to turn to crime. You know, that might be a better way to go. Trying to stop it at the source, you know, that sort of thing. That's what we actually need. No?
Right. So I said I would come back to a point, and that is where the report says, or this report says, that nothing was done to hinder the previous panel's report.
Yep, sorry, I apologize.
The previous panel and the Metropolitan Police had beef, and I mean beef. So this report was initially meant to take 1 year. The original panel's report was meant to take 1 year. It took 7 years. Mm-hmm. Right? And part of the problem was they were arguing over how to get information. The information the panel was getting from the police was being redacted. Yeah. The police were saying, look, we have security concerns regarding this. We don't believe that it's secure for the panel to have all of this information, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here's the funny thing about this. The person who was doing the redacting for the Metropolitan Police Service in regards to the information that the panel could have did not have adequate security clearance to redact the documents that were supposed to go to the panel. But the panel who was getting the redacted documents actually had the security clearance for the documents that they were requesting. So if there is a security concern, surely that security concern should not be within the panel, but it should be within the Met Police itself, right? That's one incident. Another incident was where the panel sent a courier to collect some documents from the Metropolitan Police, and the police refused to give the documents to the courier because they did a background check on the courier. And the courier had some criminal history. Now, here's the thing.
The irony is about to
The irony of this is that this report highlights the fact that the police have been hiring people with criminal backgrounds.
Normal hiring practices.
And the vetting processes and procedures that should be in place are inadequate, they are ignored, or here's the kicker of it all, they are open to subjective subjective overview. So the police force itself can decide whether to take the risk with this person or not. So you could go through all the vetting procedures and they could declare, no, this person shouldn't be, but the police force could still go and hire them. Now, why is this problematic?
Because the police force is filled with pedophiles and rapists?
White supremacists, you name it. So all you're going to do is reinforce the culture of criminals, pedophiles, rapists, and white supremacists. Because even if anything comes up in those backgrounds, your white supremacist mate is simply going to say, hey,
yeah, that's right. Be okay.
I know him. He's a stand-up guy. He'll be all right. And of course, when stop and search figures go up for that area and community, no questions will be asked regarding the police and their hiring practices. The questions will be asked of the communities which are being over-policed and that are having racist policies implemented. Because at the heart of this, they speak of like specialist units within the report. And one of the specialist units that they speak of is Operation Trident. And Operation Trident was specifically established to do what? Police Black communities, right? However, over the years, the remit has changed. But how it has changed has criminalized Black communities even further. So Operation Trident was initially set up to, or the claim was to deal with Black on Black crime, right? First of all, no such thing exists because there's no such thing as white on white crime, right? But what the remit of that morphed into over time was we're dealing with Black on Black crime. Oh, now we're dealing with gang crime. So you have that automatic link of Black communities and now gangs.
Yep.
Right? Now, here's the thing. I know people that work within that department. And I know Black people that work within that department. And they have told me of the racism that they have to face daily from the police within this department. Right? So we're dealing with a whole bunch of issues of where it's just easy for criminals, racists, and the dregs of society to hire like-minded dregs of society.
See, I also had the other kind of side of the coin, which is I also said to you, you know, when is it that a person is rehabilitated? At what point do we allow them to have served their crime? Where they, you know, should there not be a methodology to deal with people who have turned their life around and who are no longer within those spectres? And in fact, wouldn't those be good people to have within the police force, to be more compassionate, to be more understanding, to work out how to actually reach people that like how they were? And so there are both sides to the argument. I just think, as you say, the problem being that if from the get-go you're already corrupt, even if a person had turned their life around, they would go into the police force, find exactly the same gang that they had left out there, and then end up corrupted again. But this time with the backing of the police force, you know. Right. And so I think that's really, I think it's really sad that you can't have a rehabilitative conversation about, you know, ex-convicts having, or people who've been charged with criminal actions, having the opportunity to go on and then have careers which are helpful because of the fact that the police are corrupt.
See, the thing is, I actually don't have a problem necessarily with the police hiring ex-criminals and the rehabilitative nature of it. The issue with this comes from the fact that the measures and policies and vetting policies that should be in place and the oversight policies that should be in place are being ignored or not fit for purpose, right? So just in regards to the vetting, I'm going to give you another quote from the report to buttress this point. To its credit, the Metropolitan Police has in recent years greatly reduced the number of its personnel who have not been security vetted. But this alone isn't enough. The force does not know whether all of those insensitive posts, such as child protection, major crime investigation, and informant handling, have been cleared to the level needed. This strikes us as unprofessional and it creates obvious risks, right? In each of the 2 years before our inspection, more than 50 people who had committed offenses were allowed to join the Metropolitan Police. Most offenses were not especially serious, but they did include theft, handling stolen goods, and wounding. And some recruits were closely connected to known criminals, right? Now, this becomes important because it's gonna lead into the next point that I want to make. And that is that this report regarding corruption found that there were inadequate procedures for crime scene handling, for evidence storage, for weapon storage. They found that drugs, that contraband would routinely go missing. On one storage room, the passcode for the door was inscribed on the door. Somebody had etched it into the door.
So sorry. I should have laughed.
You have to understand, it's not about whether the criminals can be rehabilitated and join the police force. It's the fact that you don't have anything to monitor these people to make sure that they're okay, that they're on a straight and narrow, and you don't have methods in place to actually deal with the fact that you might have criminals within your midst that you don't know about yet, right?
Oh gosh.
Now,
if you weren't a criminal before you joined, you could very easily become one while joining.
Listen,
I mean, like, let's be honest.
Listen, you know when you watch those movies,
number in the door for the door.
I think it was Bad Boys, where they broke into the police station to steal the drugs. I'm like, if you walked into the Met Police, you ain't gotta carry no gun. You don't need no heist. You just walk up to the storage room. Hey, there's the code. Beep, 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 and walk out with your drugs.
Hilarious. That's deeply disturbingly hilarious.
Right?
I'm sorry.
But this leads on to actually, I mean, that's hilarious, but this is actually going to lead on to a more troubling and disturbing.
No, that's really troubling and disturbing. It's just that it's funny.
No, it gets worse. It gets worse.
I'm sure it does.
Right. So I think one of the most troubling pieces of information to come out of this report, and I don't think it's been highlighted enough, the real potential threat and danger of it, is that 2,000 people who have left the Met Police, either through retirement or being fired or resignation, or whether wrongdoing or not, there are 2,000 unaccounted warrant cards.
Oh yeah, you told me about this. This was horrifying, actually. So there's just people
those that don't know, the warrant card of a police officer in the UK is essentially the police badge. Right? That is what essentially gives you your power to operate as a police officer in the UK. There are 2,000 of these things missing from the Met Police. Right? So I don't even know how many are missing from other forces around the country. Now, why is this dangerous? Well,
because you got rogue people who just can be. Listen, you already have problems with card-carrying police officers doing crimes, but now you have missing badges that can be used to commit crimes. Like, let's be honest, people are not safe. There's no safety in those streets.
So let's just look at it from what's happened recently with police and the crimes that serving police officers have committed, right?
Okay.
You're walking alone late at night. You're going home. Someone approaches you and says, "Hey, it's not safe out here. What are you doing?" and shows you a warrant card, right? It's not safe out here. They identify them as themselves as a police officer because now they have a warrant card. Let me drop you home.
My mum always told me don't do that, you know.
Right?
My mum always
But the
told me.
reality is most young people, or most people, most women, or a lot of women would be reassured by the fact this is a police officer. A lot of young girls would feel there's a power dynamic here.
Yeah.
You'd
feel safe. You'd feel like I was raised not to trust them, so that's a slightly different issue, probably. As
but
a young
even if you don't trust them, if you're young,
even so, let me finish my point. Even so, even though I was raised to say if a male police officer approaches you, you call and ask for a female officer. You don't trust whoever's standing in front of you. Even so, I've had to use the police service. So there is a certain degree of safety that comes from thinking that this person is responsible enough to be trusted with my safety. There's a certain amount of, okay, police officers should be trustworthy. So therefore, if you show me a badge, I should be able to trust that you're not like the other guy that I'm probably nervous about, who's following me, or who is walking down the road and I'm feeling a bit frightened. You would be the safer of the two options, because as far as my understanding would be, as a young person or as a vulnerable woman or as whatever it is, you've been vetted. You should be okay. I mean, clearly history tells us that it's not, but you should be okay, right?
Right. But the point I want to make is that a police officer or somebody who purports to be a police officer rolls up on a 18-year-old or some young person. That person will probably not feel empowered to say no. I'm not going.
Absolutely.
Right? And there are 2,000 of these warrant cards missing. So there are a potential 2,000 Wayne Cousins out there.
Yep.
Right. And that's just for basic things. Like, here's the thing. You could use that warrant card to stop people that are selling drugs, confiscate the drugs and say, I'm going to give you a chance, and then use the drugs yourself or sell them or whatever. This thing can be misused and abused.
I mean, the mishandling of it can get you into places. It could let you ride things for free. It could give you authority with which you don't have. I mean, it can be used for positive, negative, outlets. The reality is it's being abused, whatever the intention, whether you are using it for sexual misconduct or to steal someone's drugs, you are still using. It's a crime.
Right.
It's a crime. Okay. What are you arguing about? It's a crime. Like it's
right.
Actually
it is a crime. It is a crime. But this. So my argument in this is that yes, that's dangerous, but it also links into this concept that the police were not intentionally hindering the original panel's investigation, because all of these failings that you are arguing, all of these concerns that you are arguing in regards to security, you have had recommendations made to you over the years to shore up and your security policies and measures, right?
Yep.
Your 2,000 missing badges. You don't know who you have, because there's another thing in the report. You don't know who you've given phones to and laptops to.
Did you notice the number difference? So they said they've given out 45,000 telephones. They have 44,000 employees, but yet still large percentages of the employees don't have phones.
No, they're using. No, this is what the report highlights. They're using their own phones.
But they said it's because they don't have access. Some of them just don't have access.
No, they don't. Right? They don't have access to
44,000 phones going. 45,000 phones, going when you have 44,000 employees.
Yeah. look, listen, they get it. They get him that 5-finger discount, right? Look, the reality is, all of these concerns that you made to the original panel, talking about, look, we have security concerns, right? I think I've given enough examples to show security is not one of your priorities, right? I think I can build a case to establish security is not your main concern. So why would you not give the panel, who has the clearance for this, unredacted information? Why would you keep saying to them security, 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 and hindering them at every turn?
Well,
Now,
you know why? Because it's institutionally corrupt.
Right. Now, here's the thing. This report here takes this incident in isolation. So as I said, I think I can establish security isn't a concern, so that should negate that argument. However, as I said, let's then look at this point of not hindering panel's investigations, and then we'll just bring back Child Q that we did a couple of weeks ago. And their panel was reporting exactly the same issues and problems in getting information to deal with their investigation adequately. And the Metropolitan Police, once again, was hindering the investigation by not providing the information.
Shocking.
Right? So this report takes this in isolation and says, no, we can't declare you're institutionally corrupt because we just simply find this failing and that failing, and we don't believe you're intentionally doing this. But actually, when we start to look at the investigations and the independent inquiries going on, we find that there is a pattern of behavior.
This is just your normal MO.
Right? And so, as I said, you have to understand, I said I wanted to give some of the context and history of the Inspectorate of Constabulary, because they whitewash quite often or play down the failings of the police. Right?
Yeah, we still have those problems.
And just on another note, because there will be people out there that are staunch defenders of the police. I think one of the things, if you want to defend the police, if you want to give them the benefit of the doubt, et cetera, you cannot deny that this report says, look, you've had recommendations, you haven't implemented it, right? We now are giving you recommendations, right? Which we all know won't be implemented. Even if you're the most staunch defender of the police, there's one thing about these reports that you cannot deny that is problematic. The police force, in its failing to implement these recommendations, is a drain on the public purse.
Oh, well, there's that too.
Because each of these inquiries costs a lot of money.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? So defend the police all you want, but you need to also recognize, hey, there's no escaping this. Every time we have an inquiry, a panel set up, et cetera, it's costing taxpayer money.
Yeah.
And the easiest way to save that money is to simply implement the recommendations.
There you go. Make a change from the top down. I hope that as people listen to us, I know it may have been technical jargon you had to keep up, but I really do hope that as people listen to you unpack these issues with the backdrop of having, of course, all of those news stories of corrupted police officers doing criminal actions, that what they realize is that the importance of telling these stories is not just about telling the story, it's about holding the police accountable. It's about looking for active change. It's about working out in your local community, what would that look like, and how can we better support young people, particularly who are at on the receiving end predominantly of the police's wrath, across the country. How do we actually go about making the police different? And there are many organizations who are working towards that. There are abolitionists who, as I said, I've mentioned believe that actually just dismantle the system and start again. We just can't have this system. But there's everything in between. Depending on the flavor you like, there's everything in between. Something has to be done, and it has to be better than what we have now, because otherwise we really are no better than the criminals, are we? No. We keep letting these people get away with these things. You know, we're going to have another Child Q. We're going to have another Sarah Everard. We're going to have another having a bit on
Yvonne Farrell. The names are endless.
The names are endless of people that we've been talking about. And so I really do hope that people who are listening are educating themselves. And in some real ways, there are basic things to do that you can actually educate the next generation also. Because, of course, as I've said, I was raised that you don't trust the police. If you're a woman and you're alone and somebody approaches you with a badge, that's a remedy for disaster. Don't trust that person. Call 911.
Hell a bus.
Listen, stay on a bus. You know, when I heard they actually gave that advice, as to this day, I was like, you put in bus drivers have saved many a woman's life. That's all I can really say. But yeah, it puts a lot of pressure on the rest of the services to actually be safe spaces for people to exist. So I do hope for those of you that stick with the program and that are watching today and were like, whoo, that was intense, my head is blown, that you also realize there's something I can do, and I can hold my local police force accountable. I can ask to see reports. I can educate young people about what their rights are. I can protest where necessary. We can, you know, do all sorts of things to make a change. Any last thoughts?
Yeah, actually. Well, more a song.
Oh no.
Well, no, it's an edited song. In fact, I'm just gonna ask a question. I'm not gonna subject people to my singing. We don't talk about Willie.
Excuse me?
We don't talk about Will.
Well?
Yeah, see? You know, the Chris Rock special.
Oh no, we did not talk about Will. No, we are not doing it. I have avoided. No, we are not. Oh no. Those people that tune into the dark side for that, yeah, no. Okay, good.
Well, I think there's a lot of things in that the dark side actually could deal with, and a lot of subjects and issues that come out of it. But anyway, no, I don't know. I don't know what we're doing next week.
And then we'll see what we're doing next week. We only have a couple more weeks, folks, and then we are on vacation for 2 weeks.
Are we doing the John MacArthur report? Because you know my feelings on that dude.
Yes, we did want to do the John MacArthur report. For those of you that don't know, I posted it today. I did post that I was going to do it today on the dark side, and there were so many news stories I forgot. So maybe next week we will look at an oldie but a goodie. There's a new report that talks about the abuse that was happening in the John MacArthur megachurch out in the States. It's not pretty.
Listen, the abuse was the fact that people had to sit down, or that people sat down and listened to this man. Anybody who sat down and listened to him was a victim of abuse.
Yeah. I'm just looking around. I swear I've got some books that may be covered up on my shelf from him from back in the day. Anyway, let's leave that one alone. Yes, maybe we'll go with an oldie but a goodie next week for institutional corruption in the Christian church. We need a break. We need a 2-week vacation. Is coming at the end of April. 2 weeks. So you only have a few more weeks of us, and then we are on vacation for 2 weeks to regenerate and put positive vibes back in and give ourselves something good to think about while the world continues to descend. We don't talk about Will. We don't talk about Chris. We don't talk about Jada. No. Maybe you really look like Bruno, actually. We don't talk about Bruno.
Can we talk about August Alsina then?
Oh my gosh, you're just going there. No, do you know what? I think this is what.
Come to the dark side, my young Padawan.
The thing is, for me, that I'm a little bit frustrated with how the conversation went. It's been a really wide conversation, but there have been some evidently lacking parts of the dialogue. And for me, that's been kind of frustrating. So, yes, parts that talk about neurodiversity have been missing. I found that quite frustrating. And I still find it quite frustrating that the whole neurodiversity of these two men has been completely missed out of the conversation. And while somebody said, oh, but you're looking to blame their neurodiversity. No, it's not about blame or give them an excuse for why they behave the way that. It's not about excuses. That conversation about blame and you can't have an excuse. It's just bad behavior. You're just making excuses. I think people need to understand the difference between a reason and an excuse. There is historical reasons. There are things that are happening that give understanding and clarity, and then there's making excuses. Those two are not the same thing, and that has been rather frustrating. Anyway, we don't talk about Will. For those of you that joined in to watch us discuss Will and Chris, yeah, I forgot about that story today. For the first time this week, I forgot about that story. Even as new news dropped that his Netflix has been put on the back burner to make his next film or whatever, next project it was, which is quite sad.
Oh, well, rich people losing out on money.
I'm not rich, so pay me something. I do think a good mediator, therapist, pastor would be really needed in that situation. I think there's some education that needs to be done, but that's just me. What do I know? Well, Bruno.
Told you. Emperor Palpatine.
Either way, we're going to say goodbye because we've well and truly gone over time with this report. So we thank everybody who has joined us. We have loved having you here. For those of you that have texted me for your participation, thank you very much. Bless you. We will see you next week when we're probably going to be talking about the John MacArthur report that's just been released into the institutional abuse issues that have been happening in his megachurch. Take a deep breath. Have a blessed, may your week be filled with rainbows, butterflies, and all good things, because we'll be back on the dark side on Sunday at 9 p.m. Central European time, and for whenever you catch up in the week. Peace.
What?
You know, say bye? You know, say nothing?
No,
Oh, yeah, sir.